Howdy folks, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I am your host, the Mighty Bjorn, and today for you, had a bit of a Dungeons and Dragons video. And actually today's video has to kind of deal with a video I did in the past. In the past, I did a video titled A Knight's Life and Your Dungeons and Dragons Campaign, and essentially I discuss about knights, their training, basically their beginnings as pages, moving on to being squires and then becoming knights themselves, essentially their education, the different types of training, things of that nature. But during that video, I very briefly discussed the Code of Chivalry. And the reason I did it that way is because I felt the Code of Chivalry, to really discuss it, really deserves its own video because it's really complicated in itself. And I'm going to get a little bit into that here. There were some people that definitely took interest in that. So I figured, sure, let's do this video and discuss about the Code of Chivalry. Now, with that being said, the place to really start is just to try and get a baseline understanding of the history of the Code of Chivalry and what it is. Now, understand that this is just a baseline. It's a primer. I'm not really going to go into extreme depth because, as I said, it is a very complicated subject. And it's mostly got to do with standards, practices, things of that nature. But before I get into the meat and potatoes of today's video, I want to quickly just mention that I've been fighting against the YouTube algorithm for a long time now. I could definitely use your help. It's kind of like the final boss you don't want to deal with, or the big bad dragon. So definitely like, comment, subscribe. That all kind of helps me out. Also, for anyone interested that would like to give the channel additional support, I do have a Patreon page. The link will be in the video description that you can go check that out. Things of that nature. So let's move on to the roots of the Code of Chivalry. And looking at it from a historical standpoint, it looks like the Code of Chivalry was around the late 12th, early 13th century. It doesn't seem like historians really know exactly when the Code of Chivalry was developed. And realistically, it seems like its roots are tied to Charlemagne and actually his cavalry. And realistically, what it is it was set up to be more or less a code of conduct or a code of rules and expectations that these cavalrymen were to live by, essentially. How they would present themselves on and off the battlefield. Now, with that being said, before chivalry, knights really didn't have the best reputation. They were kind of looked upon as nothing more than hired thugs, realistically. Now, that could be split between kings and things of that nature. And this becomes a more complicated subject in itself. Now, when chivalry was, like, it seems like, or looking at the historical documentation or what historians have found, it looks like initially when chivalry was set up, or was beginning set up, more or less being developed, it was more standards on battlefield practices, how knights would act on the battlefield, taking prisoners, things of that nature. With that being said, though, it wouldn't stay that way, and a part of that is believed to be because of the church. Essentially, it was kind of believed to be a good knight, you also had to be a good Christian. So there was a lot of influence in the Code of Chivalry because of the church. I don't know how much influence the church really had, except for the part of just being a good Christian, which was actually pretty important in medieval Europe at the time. Now, with all that being said, there really actually is no standard code of chivalry. It's not like it's some kind of written book or anything of that nature. And that kind of makes the water a bit more murky about the Code of Chivalry, because essentially nothing was ever really written about the Code of Chivalry outside of what was romanticized by writers at the time about the Code of Chivalry. There's just no standard rule book or playbook, if you will, of what the Code of Chivalry really means. So it's not, while not being a formal code, it was taken very seriously and would be taught from knights to squires down to pages. So it was something that was, like I said, just constantly practiced. With that being said, though, there's also some moments where the Code of Chivalry kind of got thrown out the window. Now, these circumstances would be rare circumstances, but there is notations and historical proof of the Code of Chivalry wasn't always upheld, if you will, even though it was practiced and taken seriously. Now, I do have a list here of essentially common practices or common themes of the Code of Chivalry, which is courage, military prowess, honesty, honor, loyalty, justice, good manners, and generosity. And these are just kind of hallmarks, if you will, of what the Code of Chivalry is. But it's, once again, there's still just nothing that's really standard, because the thing is like with the loyalty, I know a part of the Code of Chivalry kind of outlines loyalty to your family, but you also need to have loyalty to the king. So things get a little bit murky on that end. Military prowess, does it mean, it kind of means you're not supposed to back down from a fight, going by the Code of Chivalry or the romanticized Code of Chivalry, but essentially committing suicide in combat really isn't the best way to go either. So it's kind of a really weird thing when it comes to the Code of Chivalry, which kind of makes it a bit more difficult to explain what the Code of Chivalry really is, because once again, as I've said previously, it's just not something that's standardized, and it's not well explained, and it's not well documented. Now, with that being said, Dungeons and Dragons has already kind of outlined the Code of Chivalry. I don't remember anything really being in advanced Dungeons and Dragons, but in 3.0 edition, there was a book called Sword and Fist by Jason Carl. And essentially, this was a supplement for fighters and monks. It had additional equipment, special rules, some new prestige classes, and one of those prestige classes was the Knight Protector. There was also the Cavalier was also in this book, even though that wasn't the first appearance of the Cavalier. That goes all the way back to Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. But the Knight Protector it's like Knight Protector of the Great Kingdom is the full class name. And essentially that does actually outline something very similar to the Code of Chivalry. And I actually do have a picture of the sidebar here, and this kind of explains the Code of Chivalry in itself, or a way to use the Code of Chivalry. And essentially it was just a standard by which the knight himself would live by. It wasn't necessarily a set of special rules or that it did anything special, but it was something that the PC, through role play, should essentially live by, and a set of standards. And essentially it was up to the player, and more or less up to the dungeon master, to decide, is the Knight Protector living to this code? But this is, as you can see there, the section that says the code is actually the code for the Knight Defender, and it's a very good generic representation, in my opinion, of what chivalry is. And the nice thing about it is it doesn't provide any bonuses. It doesn't provide any penalties. It's not something that's steadfast that you have to do all the time, on like with the paladin and his devotions. It's something, though, that you just kind of have to do. And with that being said, there's also other classes that I kind of feel need to uphold this code as well. I said a bit ago about the Cavalier also is in 3.0, 3.5 Dungeons and Dragons. The Paladin should also lives by a very similar code, although their code's a bit different because they're more devoted to the church. The temples. But then there's also the Templar himself. So I think that's actually kind of a really good thing to get to point out to other character classes that, hey, if you're going to play this character class, you need to uphold this code of chivalry because that character actually would live by a code of chivalry because they would be knights in general. In the case of like the Cavalier, the Cavalier is actually a version of the knight. Now, with that being said, another one is also the Paladin. We know about the Paladin devotions with the 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. Now, the devotions provides a bonus, but even Paladin should uphold by some type of form of the Code of Chivalry. And once again, I kind of look at the code from the Knight Protector class in the Sword and Fist guide because it gives a really good, very understandable outline of what that code would look like, what it would look, what chivalry should look like, if you will. But anyway, folks, hopefully this gives a good explanation to you, or at least a good baseline explanation of what chivalry is, what it means, and why knights kind of upheld those standards, if you will, and how to implement it in your Dungeons and Dragons campaign. Because I definitely feel that if you're going to have knights and cavaliers and paladins and stuff like that, they definitely should uphold some form of chivalry. But anyway, folks, hopefully you all enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for tuning in and have yourself a wonderful day.